Never before was there a Christian government, as the English called it, so indifferent to the death of so many people. Yes, you may groan, but the time will come when we shall know how many perished. And though politicians may show false distress, and try to hide the truth, the time will come when England and the world will know, in frightening detail, the wretched management of the affairs of Ireland, how and why potato blight was allowed to bring the people to starvation, disease and death. In the first year of the famine, the English Prime Minister, Sir Robert Peel, imported Indian corn from North America into Ireland, to the value of £100,000. It was distributed by sea around all the ports of Ireland, then ground into a yellow meal, which played an important part in helping to keep some people alive. Father Louis Hennepin, the first European to describe the Niagara Falls, made the earliest reference to European agriculture in Ontario. He said, both the Indian and European corn were cultivated very well. This corn was used mainly for pigs and chickens. Before Sir Robert Peel could import more Indian corn, he had to repeal the corn laws, which protected English farmers against the importation of cheap foreign grain. The Prime Minister made many enemies, even within his own Conservative Tory party. The Tory landed gentry made it impossible for aid to continue. The Tory government fell. The way was clear for the formation of a Whig government under Sir John Russell. The Whigs and Tories were opposing political parties in the 18th century. The Whigs had an extreme Protestant belief that governments should not interfere in the God-given, free market. Giving free or even subsidized food to the Irish, like Peel had done, was not countenanced. Facing reality, and the truth, were not countenanced either. The doctrine of laissez-faire or leaving the economy to market forces was rigidly enforced by the Russell government. Said Russell, I assure the members of the House that the government will not import food from other countries. We think it far better to leave the supplying of the people to private enterprise and the ordinary trade. The politics of non-interference with trade may be good in ordinary times, but not when a potato famine had created a calamity, which had suddenly fallen upon Ireland, without precedent in the history of the world. There were no traders here. It was not reasonable to suppose that, suddenly, merchants and retailers could spring up to supply people's needs. Her Majesty's ministers should have broken the rigid, indeed undeveloped rules of political economy, to save a population from a horrible death. So wrote George William Frederick Villiers, the 4th Earl of Clarendon. To the Prime Minister, I am unable to change the views of Charles Wood or Trevelyan, who said that the right course was to do nothing for Ireland and leave things to the operation of natural causes. Charles Wood was Chancellor of the Exchequer, who had the final say about expenditure on famine relief. He was a firm disciple of laissez-faire, as was his permanent head at the Treasury, Charles Edward Trevelyan, the son of an Anglican clergyman and a career civil servant. One of his teachers had been the Reverend Thomas Malthus, who taught that famine would act as a preventive check on population growth. Ever the expedient civil servant, Trevelyan said, all we can safely aim for is to see that the people in every part of Ireland may have the opportunity of purchasing food at current prices, if they have the means to do so, he knowing full well that they had no means and would die the most awful of deaths. In Dublin Castle, the people in the Commissioner's office had a close-up experience of the horrors unfolding. They knew that Ireland had no food retail network and that one could not be created out of nothing. Keeping responsibility for death, at arm's length, is a psychological capacity. The Irish Secretary himself admitted that, in many parts of the country, the population had been decimated and he said, every day we hear of people being starved to death. I want to know then, what prevented ministers from sending any food to Ireland? To feed the starving people here? I have always felt a certain horror of political economists, since I heard one of them say that he feared the famine of 1848 in Ireland would not kill more than 1 million people. And that would scarcely be enough to do much good. To do what good, did he mean? Trevelyan, however, was just worried that helping Ireland might hurt England's economic interest. Not joining the dots, he said. It is useless to transfer famine from one country to another. I am not at all appalled by your Irish tenants dying. That seems to be a necessary part of the process. We must not complain about what we really want to obtain, sustainable, profitable estates. But as justly observed by you, We must do all we can and leave the rest to God. I hope that, if there are any Catholic priests about, they will make this clear. It is hard upon the poor people that they should be deprived of knowing that they are suffering from the infliction of God's providence. In the first year of the famine, the English government started public works. Putting up half the cost, roads were built in Fermoy, County Cork. Steep hills, on each side of the town, were cut away, to leave high footpaths, still so distinctive of the town. Wages at 6, 7 and 8 pence a day, with food, were deliberately designed to be so low that nobody would choose to work on a government scheme. Who could find other work? Only a fraction of the destitute could be given employment. In August 1846, the Russell government brought in the Labour Rate Act, designed to move the cost of the public works onto the Irish rates. One might as well have issued an edict for general starvation and halt supplies of food altogether. The countryside of Ireland is still dotted with the remains of workhouses, set up as a result of the Irish Poor Law passed in 1838. Drafting the law, George Nichols admitted that its object was not so much to mitigate the suffering of the Irish poor as to prevent them from coming over to England. Workhouses were paid for by local rates and were made as uncomfortable as possible, so that nobody would be encouraged to go there. Yet, in 1849, nearly 1 million souls were kept in workhouses, which gives some idea of the degradation of the Irish people. These workhouses were the only alternative to starvation for many during the famine, but, before one could enter the workhouse or receive any food, one had to give up any rights to land over 1/4 of an acre. Tenants knew that, under their Gaelic law, they had owned their land. And when it happened that the workhouses closed, for lack of money, inmates, men, women and children, were turned out on the side of the road, to die.